G'day everyone, my name's Matt and welcome back to the third in a series of videos talking all about fire and fire behaviour. In today's video, we're going to be talking about incomplete combustion versus complete combustion, which is basically talking about fires burning with a lot of black smoke being produced, or fires that are burning cleanly and not producing a lot of black smoke. To do that, we're going to need to talk about a little bit of chemistry, but don't worry, I'm a firefighter, not a chemist, so I am going to keep it pretty simple. Firstly, I guess we should bring up a couple of examples of complete combustion and incomplete combustion. And first of all, we're going to go with a really good example of complete combustion. All right, so our first example is going to be a piece of wood from a eucalyptus tree. And this is quite a good example for complete combustion because it's not as fuel rich as some of the man-made hydrocarbons that we've been burning in the previous episodes. Now, as it's burning, you'll notice that there is still a little bit of the pyrolysis gases coming from the right-hand side of the flame. But for the most part, above the flame, it's burning quite cleanly, which is to say there isn't a lot of black smoke being produced. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about complete combustion. Now, there are still pockets of black smoke where the carbon and the carbon monoxide aren't being completely oxidized. But for the most part, you can see that this can burn cleanly. And as you'd expect, as soon as I blow the flame out, we return to pyrolysis gases with the lighter colors of smoke. And for our second example, we're burning some styrofoam. And as you can see, it's burning with a lot of black smoke being created, or incomplete combustion. And this is because styrofoam is quite fuel-rich, being a man-made hydrocarbon. It's also quite chemically complex, which makes it difficult for the fire to oxidize the materials that are being pyrolyzed away. Now, despite the fact that this is burning with a lot of black smoke, if I were to blow these flames out right now, we still return to a lot of pyrolysis gases, which really just emphasizes the difference between incomplete combustion and pyrolysis. All right, so now we've seen that complete combustion burns without a lot of visible smoke being produced, whereas incomplete combustion creates a lot of this black smoke that we normally associate with house fires and the like. So the question is what's going on in each process? Why is there black smoke being produced in one, whereas the other is burning quite cleanly? And to explain that, we're going to have a look at a little bit of chemistry. All right. So what we're going to talk about now is complete and incomplete combustion. And to do that, firstly, we're going to need a fuel source. So what I'm going to do is draw myself a bit of a candle. Now, this candle is made up of a fuel source called paraffin wax. And paraffin wax is made up of a heap of hydrogen and carbon, which is what we call a hydrocarbon. Now, paraffin itself, we know, is made up of 20 carbon atoms for 42 hydrogen atoms, which means for every 20 carbon atoms, there are 42 hydrogen atoms all linked together in a big long chain, creating a long chain molecule. And this is what gives us our solid fuel source that we see as the paraffin wax. For our source of oxygen, what we've got is we've got the oxygen in the air, which we know is around about 20.9% oxygen. So that's the all the air that's actually surrounding our candle is being our oxygen source for our fire. All right, so our final side of the fuel triangle is our heat. And that comes from a match or a lighter or something like that, but it's an introduced source of heat, which eventually gives us the third side of our fire triangle, and therefore we then can have flaming combustion. Now, the question is what's actually going on here? Well, what we've got is we've got our heat, we've got our fuel, and we've got our oxygen. So we have a fire burning. But between our fuel and our heat, what we're getting is pyrolysis occurring. So we've got our long chain molecule making up our hydrocarbon. That is actually being broken down by the heat. And through the process of pyrolysis, it's being broken down into shorter and shorter segments until we end up with our carbon and our hydrogen starting to float away from around the wick. And I'm sure as you've blown a candle out before, you've seen that there's always that white smoke that's present just afterwards. That's the pyrolysis gases that are actually being released from the wick. And they're the flammable gases. That's our carbon and our hydrogen that is just floating away. But as the flame's actually burning, those elements are actually being oxidized. They're actually joining with the oxygen in the air. So what's actually happening is as the carbon starts to float away, it finds some oxygen. So what happens is the oxygen latches onto the carbon in a chemical reaction that releases light and heat. And that's what we know is actually a flame. And the same thing is actually happening with the hydrogen. So as the hydrogen is starting to float away, once again, it meets up with the oxygen. They join together, and when they slam together, they release a lot of heat and light. And once again, that's adding to the visible light of the flame. Now, there's two different types of main reactions in this process. The first one is a complete combustion reaction. And this is where our carbon or our hydrogen is joining with our oxygen and being fully oxidized. And one of the byproducts of this is carbon dioxide. So as the carbon floats out, it finds all the oxygen that it wants. We end up with carbon plus 2 oxygen atoms joined to it, and we have a fully oxidized carbon dioxide. That takes care of our carbon in this reaction, but how about the hydrogen? Well, for the hydrogen, what we end up with is H2O. So we've got our hydrogen atoms joining up with oxygen atoms, and we end up with H2O, which is water. And it may come as a bit of a surprise to some people that water is actually a byproduct of most fires, because hydrogen is usually present in most fuels that we encounter. Now, this is a complete combustion reactions, and when we're just simply talking about a hydrocarbon with containing only carbon and hydrogen, these are the byproducts that we get. For an incomplete combustion reaction, however, we still get our carbon dioxide. Jumped ahead of myself. We still get our carbon dioxide and our water, but we also get carbon monoxide. And so this is what happens when the oxygen doesn't actually manage to fully oxidize the carbon as it comes through. And so we end up with our carbon only receiving one oxygen, and therefore it becomes carbon monoxide rather than carbon dioxide. Now, this is really important because carbon monoxide is actually really flammable, and it's also quite toxic to us as humans. So anything that creates carbon monoxide, is actually quite inappropriate to have in our homes because it can be quite toxic towards us. Now, the final element that we can get in this reaction is just pure carbon. And this is what makes up a lot of the soot that we see coming out of the top of the flame. So our black smoke and these kinds of things is generally just a whole heap of carbon which hasn't been oxidized at all. And this is really the main differences between our complete combustion reactions and our incomplete combustion reactions. Now, it's really important to note that this is just the case for something like a hydrocarbon that only contains carbon and hydrogen. Once we start introducing a lot of other elements into that, we're going to end up with a whole heap of different reactions that we're not going to be covering in this video. But for a nice simple example of complete combustion and incomplete combustion, our paraffin wax can work quite well. So now that we've seen how the chemistry works, it's easy to understand why one of our examples might be burning and creating a lot of this black smoke and incomplete combustion, and the other example can be burning quite cleanly and actually oxidizing away a lot of these pyrolysis materials, leaving us just with carbon dioxide and water. Whereas in the case of incomplete combustion, we can be left with carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and water, and that's just talking about hydrocarbons. Now, this is particularly important when we start introducing fire into our homes for the purposes of cooking or heating or these kinds of things. Because if we start to use the wrong kinds of heaters or wrong kinds of cookers, particularly ones designed for outdoor use, we can start to introduce a lot of carbon monoxide into our homes. And this can cause some very serious health issues and if not death if left unchecked. Now, knowing this is also really important for firefighters because it helps us to start to read a lot more into our smoke and figure out what's happening inside a structure fire or those kinds of things before we commit to making entry. That's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll try have another one out in the next week or so. But till next time, cheers.